In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean during World War II, where steel titans clashed beneath tropical skies and the fate of nations hung in the balance, one modest destroyer escort would accomplish what no other warship in naval history had achieved before or since. This is the extraordinary tale of the USS England, a vessel that in just 12 days would sink 6 enemy submarines, establishing a record so remarkable that it remains unmatched to this day. Between May 19th and May 31st, 1944, this single American warship would systematically hunt down and destroy an entire line of Japanese submarines, changing the course of naval warfare and demonstrating the deadly effectiveness of new anti-submarine technology. The story of USS England is not merely a tale of technological superiority or tactical brilliance, but a profound testament to the convergence of human courage, intelligence breakthrough, and innovation under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The numbers alone tell an astonishing story. 6 submarines destroyed in 12 days, 5 of those kills accomplished by England herself, an average of 1 submarine every 2 days. Each engagement was a deadly game of cat and mouse played in 3 dimensions, where a single mistake could mean death for hunter or hunted. The Japanese submarines were not obsolete relics, but modern fighting vessels crewed by trained sailors. They carried deadly torpedoes, could dive deep to evade attack, and fought desperately for survival. Yet USS England, a Buckley-class destroyer escort weighing just 1,400 tons, barely 5 months out of the shipyard on her first war patrol, would systematically destroy them all. She was not a powerful fleet destroyer, but a modest escort vessel, designed primarily to protect convoys from submarine attack rather than to hunt submarines offensively. Her crew was young, relatively inexperienced in combat, led by officers who had never before sunk a submarine. The achievement becomes even more remarkable when considered in context. Other American destroyers and destroyer escorts operating in the Pacific during 1944 might sink 1 submarine during an entire deployment if they were exceptionally fortunate. Many ships served throughout the war without ever detecting a submarine, much less sinking one. Anti-submarine warfare was a difficult, frustrating business, where success was rare and failure was common. England's unprecedented success would earn her crew the Presidential Unit Citation, one of only 3 destroyer escort crews in World War II to receive this honor. Lieutenant Commander Walton Barclay Pendleton, her commanding officer, would receive the Navy Cross. Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, would send a message carrying the weight of a promise. There will always be an England in the United States Navy. That promise would be kept through multiple ships bearing the name, each carrying forward the legacy of those 12 remarkable days in May 1944. But the story of USS England begins not with thunderous explosions or dramatic sea battles, but in the quiet, methodical work of American codebreakers operating from a nondescript building in Pearl Harbor. It begins with intercepted radio messages, decoded intelligence, and the careful planning that would put England in position to make history. It begins with the convergence of technology, intelligence, training, and leadership that would prove deadly to Japan's submarine fleet. This is the story of how one American destroyer escort changed naval warfare, how intelligence and innovation defeated experience and tradition, and how young sailors facing mortal danger rose to meet extraordinary challenges. This is the story of USS England's 12 Days of Glory. By mid-1944, the Pacific War had entered its decisive phase. American forces were advancing westward across the Pacific, island by island, battle by battle, drawing ever closer to the Japanese home islands. The great carrier battles of Coral Sea, Midway, and the Philippine Sea had crippled Japanese naval aviation. American submarines were strangling Japan's merchant fleet, cutting off vital supplies of oil, rubber, and raw materials from conquered territories in Southeast Asia. Yet the Japanese fought on with desperate determination, seeking any opportunity to halt or delay the American advance. One of their few remaining tools for gathering intelligence and potentially disrupting American operations was their submarine fleet. At the war's start, in December 1941, Japanese submarines had been among the best in the world, with highly trained crews, excellent torpedoes, and sophisticated designs that emphasized long range and endurance. Many of the original submarine crews, veterans who had trained for years before the war, were dead. Their replacements, rushed through abbreviated training programs, lacked the skill and experience of their predecessors. Equipment maintenance had suffered as Japan's industrial capacity struggled to replace losses and produce new weapons. Spare parts were scarce, qualified technicians even scarcer. The submarines that went to sea in 1944 were often operating with defective equipment and inadequately trained crews. Japanese submarine doctrine compounded these problems. Unlike American submarines, which operated with considerable autonomy and flexible patrol areas, Japanese submarines were often given rigid assignments and expected to remain on station, regardless of whether they detected any targets. This lack of flexibility made Japanese submarines predictable and vulnerable to counterattack. They could not adapt quickly to changing circumstances or exploit opportunities that fell outside their assigned missions. In May 1944, the Japanese High Command was anticipating new Allied landings, but remained uncertain about the target. Would it be the Marianas, the Western Caroline Islands, or the western end of New Guinea? General Douglas MacArthur's forces were advancing along New Guinea's northern coast, supported by massive American carrier strikes. Admiral Chester Nimitz's forces in the Central Pacific seemed poised to strike somewhere. But where? To answer this question, Vice Admiral Takagi Takeo, commander of the Japanese 6th Fleet submarines, directed submarines from the 7th Submarine Squadron to establish a scouting line designated the NA Line. This submarine picket line would stretch between the Admiralty Islands north of New Guinea and Truk in the Caroline Islands, positioned directly across the route that American carriers were expected to use in their next major operation. 7 submarines were assigned to the NA Line: I-16, RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-109, and RO-116. Each submarine was given a specific patrol area with orders to remain on station and report any American naval movements. The rigid nature of these assignments, so different from the flexible patrol areas used by American submarines, would prove to be a fatal flaw in the Japanese plan. They were positioning their submarines not for attack, but for detection, making them sitting ducks for any American forces that knew where to find them. And American forces did know exactly where to find them. On May 13, 1944, the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, known as FRUPAC, and the successor to the legendary Commander Joseph Rochefort's Station Hypo, intercepted a routine Japanese radio transmission. The message, sent from submarine I-16 to the commander of Japanese Submarine Division 7, contained what seemed like mundane operational details: an estimated time of arrival off Bougainville in the Solomon Islands, scheduled for 2200 hours on May 22nd. But to the trained eyes of American intelligence officers, this intercepted message represented something far more valuable: an opportunity to strike at the heart of Japan's underwater fleet. The intelligence operation that made England's success possible had its roots in years of painstaking work by American cryptanalysts. Since the early days of the war, teams of mathematicians, linguists, and puzzle solvers had labored in secrecy to break Japanese naval codes. Their work, conducted in windowless rooms filled with IBM tabulating machines and mountains of paper, had already contributed to American victories at Midway and in the Solomon Islands. But never before had decoded intelligence been used so directly and effectively in anti-submarine warfare. The stage was set for USS England's remarkable achievement. The process of breaking the Japanese naval code, JN-25, required not just mathematical brilliance, but also deep cultural understanding and linguistic expertise. Each message had to be intercepted, recorded, analyzed for patterns, and painstakingly decoded using techniques that combined mechanical computation with human intuition. The decoded intelligence was immediately transmitted through secure channels to the Third Fleet, and from there to Commander Hamilton Haines, who commanded Escort Division 39, stationed at Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. Haines was a veteran destroyer commander who had seen action in the Atlantic before being transferred to the Pacific. His experience hunting German U-boats would prove invaluable in the coming engagement. More importantly, Haines understood the value of intelligence and how to exploit it tactically. He knew that intercepted messages revealing enemy positions were worth their weight in gold, but only if acted upon quickly and decisively before the enemy could move or alter their plans. The decoded message from I-16 was just the beginning. As FRUPAC continued monitoring Japanese radio traffic, additional intercepts revealed the broader strategic picture. The Japanese were establishing a scouting line of 7 submarines designated the NA Line, stretching between the Admiralty Islands north of New Guinea and Truk in the Caroline Islands. This submarine picket line was positioned directly across the route that American carriers were expected to use in their next major operation. Even more valuable, the intercepts provided detailed information about each submarine's assigned patrol area, their scheduled movements, and their reporting requirements. The rigid nature of Japanese submarine deployments meant that once a submarine was assigned to a patrol area, it would remain there for days or even weeks, following predetermined patterns. This predictability, combined with American knowledge of their exact positions, created a perfect opportunity for systematic destruction. Haines wasted no time organizing a response. He ordered the formation of a 3-ship hunter-killer task group, selecting the best anti-submarine vessels available for this critical mission. The group would consist of 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts: USS George, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Fred W. Just, USS Raby, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Scott, and USS England, led by Lieutenant Commander Walton Barclay Pendleton. England was temporarily detached from Escort Division 40 at Purvis Bay on Florida Island to join this urgent mission. The selection of these 3 ships was no accident. Each had been specifically equipped and trained for anti-submarine warfare, and their crews had spent months perfecting their skills in the dangerous waters around the Solomon Islands. The ships had worked together before, developing the teamwork and communication protocols that would prove essential in the coordinated attacks to come. All 3 ships were equipped with the latest anti-submarine technology, including sonar for detecting submerged submarines, radar for surface search, and most importantly, the Hedgehog anti-submarine weapon. The Hedgehog was a revolutionary forward-throwing weapon that fired 24 small projectiles in an oval pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike conventional depth charges that exploded at preset depths, whether they hit anything or not, Hedgehog projectiles only detonated on contact with a submarine's hull. This contact detonation feature was crucial. Conventional depth charge attacks alerted the submarine to the attacker's position and forced it to take violent, evasive action, even if the charges missed. The underwater explosions also disrupted the attacking ship's sonar, making it difficult to maintain contact. Hedgehog projectiles, by contrast, only exploded if they hit, meaning the attacker's sonar remained clear and could continue tracking the submarine if the initial salvo missed. The three destroyer escorts departed Purvis Bay on May 18, 1944, with Commander Haynes embarked aboard George as the officer in tactical command. Their crews, though young and relatively inexperienced in combat, had been drilled relentlessly in sonar operation, attack procedures, and damage control. This preparation would soon pay dividends beyond anyone's imagination. The ships steamed northwest at maximum sustainable speed, racing to reach the southern end of the NA line before the Japanese submarines could realize they'd been detected. The stage was set for one of the most remarkable submarine hunts in naval history. Intelligence had provided the targets. Technology had provided the weapons. Training had provided the skills. Now it remained to be seen whether USS England and her sister ships could convert opportunity into victory. The reaction to the decoded intelligence varied across different levels of American command. At the highest levels, Pacific Fleet Headquarters recognized this as a rare opportunity to strike a significant blow against Japanese submarine operations. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, personally reviewed the SHE intelligence reports and authorized aggressive action to exploit this windfall. He understood that successful attacks on the NA line submarines would not only eliminate a reconnaissance threat, but could also confuse Japanese strategic planning for their next major operation. At the tactical level, Commander Haynes approached the mission with professional caution mixed with aggressive intent. He knew that submarine hunting was difficult, frustrating work where success was never guaranteed. Even with perfect intelligence about a submarine's general location, finding and attacking a submerged vessel in thousands of square miles of ocean required skill, patience, and considerable luck. Submarines could hear approaching ships and take evasive action, diving deep or maneuvering unpredictably to avoid detection. Haynes developed a systematic approach to the hunt. His three-ship task group would proceed to the southern end of the NA line, where I-16 was scheduled to arrive first. Using the decoded intelligence to narrow the search area, the ships would establish a patrol pattern designed to detect any submarine approaching its assigned station. Once contact was established, the ships would coordinate their attacks, with one vessel maintaining sonar contact while the others maneuvered into attack positions. Lieutenant Commander Walton Barclay Pendleton's reaction aboard USS England was focused and methodical. Pendleton was a Naval Academy graduate, class of 1932, who had spent years in destroyer operations before taking command of England. He understood anti-submarine warfare thoroughly and had trained his crew relentlessly in attack procedures. When orders came to join Haynes's task group for this special mission, Pendleton saw it as an opportunity to put months of training to practical use. Pendleton's executive officer, Lieutenant John A. Williamson, shared his commander's professional approach. Williamson had been conducting endless drills, refining attack procedures, and maintaining the crew's edge during long months of routine patrols. He understood that successful submarine attacks required split-second timing, perfect coordination between bridge, sonar room, and weapons crews, and the ability to make rapid tactical decisions based on incomplete information. His contribution to England's preparation would prove decisive in the coming engagements. The crew's reaction mixed excitement with apprehension. These young sailors, many experiencing their first combat deployment, understood they were embarking on a dangerous mission. Submarine hunting meant getting close to enemy vessels that could fire torpedoes capable of sinking their ship with a single hit. The Japanese Type 95 torpedo was a formidable weapon, with a warhead containing over 1,100 pounds of explosives. A hit below the waterline could break England's back and send her to the bottom within minutes. But the crew also felt confidence born from extensive training. They'd practiced Hedgehog attacks dozens of times, learning to coordinate sonar tracking, maneuvering, and weapons firing into a seamless routine. The sonar operators had spent hundreds of hours learning to distinguish submarine contacts from false echoes caused by schools of fish, temperature layers, or underwater terrain. The Hedgehog crew had practiced loading, aiming, and firing until they could complete the entire sequence in darkness with their eyes closed. As the three destroyer escorts steamed northwest toward their patrol area, the Japanese submarines of the NA line continued their assigned missions, completely unaware that their positions had been compromised and that American hunter-killer groups were converging on their locations. The Japanese crews followed their orders, maintaining radio silence except for scheduled reports, patrolling their assigned areas, and watching for American fleet movements. The fundamental asymmetry was stark. American forces knew exactly where the Japanese submarines would be and when they would be there. Japanese forces had no idea they'd been detected, no warning that American ships were approaching, no opportunity to alter their plans or take defensive measures. This intelligence advantage, combined with superior anti-submarine technology and well-trained crews, would prove overwhelming. The stage was set for USS England's first engagement on May 19, 1944. As the task group approached the southern end of the NA line, sonar operators aboard the three destroyer escorts began intensive searching, sweeping their detection beams through the dark waters, listening for the distinctive echoes that would indicate a submarine's presence. The hunt was about to begin. The situation facing Japanese submarines in May 1944 embodied a profound contradiction that would seal their fate. On one hand, Japanese submarines represented formidable weapons with excellent capabilities. On the other hand, the doctrine governing their employment and the strategic circumstances of mid-1944 rendered those capabilities largely irrelevant. This contradiction between potential and reality would prove fatal to the NA line submarines. Japanese submarine design emphasized range, endurance, and torpedo power. The RO-class submarines, assigned to the NA line, displaced between 700 and 800 tons, surfaced, could dive to depths exceeding 300 feet, and carried 4 torpedo tubes with 14 torpedoes. They were capable of remaining at sea for over a month and could patrol vast areas of ocean. Their crews, though less experienced than pre-war veterans, still received more extensive training than their counterparts on smaller vessels. Yet these capabilities were negated by rigid operational doctrine that emphasized following predetermined plans rather than adapting to circumstances. Japanese submarine commanders were expected to remain on assigned stations regardless of whether they detected any targets or suspected they were being hunted. This inflexibility contrasted sharply with American submarine doctrine, which encouraged commanders to exercise initiative, seek targets of opportunity, and evade enemy anti-submarine forces aggressively. The contradiction extended to communications security. Japanese naval planners understood theoretically that radio transmissions could be intercepted and used to locate submarines. Yet operational requirements for submarines to report their positions and movements regularly overrode security concerns. The NA line submarines were ordered to transmit position reports, contact reports, and status updates according to rigid schedules. Each transmission provided American direction-finding stations with opportunities to locate the transmitting submarine and American code breakers with additional material for their ongoing efforts to read Japanese naval codes. Another contradiction involved tactical employment. Japanese submarines possessed excellent torpedoes and capable fire control systems, making them effective weapons for attacking enemy ships. Yet the NA Line mission assigned submarines to reconnaissance duties, requiring them to remain in fixed patrol areas, watching for American movements rather than actively seeking targets to attack. This passive role wasted offensive capabilities while exposing submarines to counter-detection by enemy forces. The most fatal contradiction involved assumptions about American capabilities. Japanese intelligence knew that American anti-submarine technology had improved significantly since the war's beginning. They knew American ships employed sonar, radar, and new weapons. But they fundamentally underestimated how effectively Americans could integrate intelligence, technology, and tactics into systematic submarine hunting operations. Japanese planners assumed that detecting submarines in vast ocean areas would remain difficult enough to provide adequate security for patrol submarines. This assumption ignored the reality that American code-breaking had reached extraordinary levels of sophistication by mid-1944. FRUPAC could read Japanese naval codes with high accuracy, providing American forces with detailed information about enemy movements, plans, and positions. Combined with direction-finding data that could locate transmitting submarines within relatively small areas, decoded intelligence transformed submarine hunting from searching thousands of square miles to searching tens of square miles. The odds shifted dramatically in favor of the hunters. The Hedgehog anti-submarine weapon represented another contradiction that Japanese planners failed to anticipate. Traditional depth-charge attacks required attacking ships to pass over the suspected submarine location and drop charges set to explode at predetermined depths. This gave submarines warning and time to take evasive action. Experienced submarine commanders could often evade depth-charge attacks through skilled maneuvering and by diving below the maximum depth setting of the charges. Hedgehog fundamentally changed this equation. The forward-throwing launcher fired projectiles ahead of the attacking ship, allowing the attacker to maintain sonar contact throughout the attack run. The contact detonation feature meant projectiles either hit and exploded, killing the submarine, or missed and sank harmlessly without disrupting sonar contact. Submarine commanders had no warning, no time to maneuver, and no opportunity to escape once a properly aimed Hedgehog salvo was fired. The final contradiction was perhaps most profound. Japanese submarine doctrine emphasized courage, determination, and willingness to die for emperor and nation. Submarine crews were expected to fight to the death rather than surrender or abandon their vessels. This warrior ethos, admirable in many respects, became a liability when facing opponents who combined superior intelligence, better technology, and more flexible tactics. Determination could not overcome the fundamental asymmetry created by broken codes and advanced weapons. The contradiction between traditional values and modern warfare would be resolved in favor of those who adapted most effectively to changing circumstances. The first engagement came on May 19, 1944, when the task group's sonar operators detected submarine I-16 exactly where decoded intelligence had predicted. The Japanese submarine, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Yoshitaka Takeuchi, was approaching its assigned patrol station off Bougainville when George gained sonar contact at a range of approximately 2,200 yards. Commander Haynes immediately maneuvered his ships into attack formation, with George maintaining sonar contact while Raby and England positioned themselves for coordinated attacks. I-16 detected the approaching destroyers and attempted evasive maneuvers, diving deeper and changing course unpredictably. But the three American ships worked together with practiced coordination, one maintaining sonar contact while the others positioned for attacks. George made the first depth charge run, forcing I-16 to maneuver violently and briefly losing contact. Raby followed with another depth charge attack that appeared to cause some damage as oil and debris rose to the surface. Then England moved into position for her first Hedgehog attack. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton brought his ship to attack course based on sonar bearings, his crew executing their practiced routine with precision. At precisely calculated range, the Hedgehog launcher fired its 24 projectiles in a broad oval pattern. Seconds later, multiple explosions indicated direct hits. The underwater detonations were followed by a massive secondary explosion as I-16's torpedoes detonated, sending a column of water hundreds of feet into the air. I-16 was destroyed with all hands, approximately 95 officers and men killed instantly. The oil slick that rose to the surface spread for hundreds of yards, mixed with debris that confirmed the kill. England's first submarine had been destroyed, but her crew had little time to celebrate. The task group immediately departed the area, steaming north toward the next submarine position indicated by decoded intelligence. The second kill came on May 22nd when the task group detected RO 106 inches, her assigned patrol area. This engagement followed a pattern similar to the first, with George and Raby making initial depth charge attacks that damaged but did not destroy the submarine. RO 106's commander, Lieutenant Kawasaki Masao, fought desperately for survival, executing violent evasive maneuvers that temporarily broke sonar contact, but England's sonar operators, gaining confidence and skill with each engagement, re-established contact and guided Pendleton into attack position. The Hedgehog salvo achieved multiple hits, and RO 106 was destroyed with all 50 crew members. The pattern was becoming clear. England's combination of superior sonar operation, precise ship handling, and deadly accurate Hedgehog attacks was proving devastatingly effective. The third kill occurred less than 24 hours later on May 23rd, when RO 104 was detected in her patrol area. This engagement demonstrated England's growing tactical proficiency, where previous attacks had required multiple runs and coordination with sister ships. England now executed a near-perfect solo attack. Her sonar operators tracked RO 104 with precision. Pendleton positioned the ship flawlessly, and the Hedgehog crew fired with deadly accuracy. Multiple projectiles struck RO 104's pressure hull, the contact detonations triggering catastrophic flooding and secondary explosions. The submarine went down quickly, taking Lieutenant Kawaguchi Takashi and all 54 crew members with her. In just 5 days, England had sunk 3 submarines, an unprecedented achievement that was beginning to attract attention from higher headquarters. The investigation into England's remarkable success revealed several factors. First was the quality of decoded intelligence that provided precise information about submarine positions. Second was the effectiveness of the Hedgehog weapon when properly employed. Third was England's superior sonar operation, with operators who could maintain contact even when submarines maneuvered violently. Fourth was Pendleton's skilled ship handling and tactical decision-making. Fifth was the crew's extensive training and growing confidence. The consequence of these early successes extended beyond the immediate tactical victories. The NA line was being systematically destroyed, eliminating the Japanese early warning system and creating confusion in Japanese strategic planning. Admiral Toyota and his staff, receiving reports that their submarines were disappearing, initially assumed they were being destroyed by a large American task force moving through the area. This misinterpretation would have significant strategic implications for Operation Ago and the upcoming Battle of the Philippine Sea. For USS England, the consequences were more immediate. The ship had proven the deadly effectiveness of her tactics and weapons. Her crew had gained invaluable combat experience and confidence, and 3 more submarine contacts still awaited them in the remaining patrol areas of the NA line. The hunt would continue. Multiple theories about optimal anti-submarine warfare tactics competed throughout the Pacific War, and USS England's operations against the NA line submarines provided a practical testing ground for these different approaches. The traditional theory, based on experience from the Atlantic and early Pacific operations, emphasized saturation attacks using conventional depth charges. Under this approach, multiple ships would attack suspected submarine locations with hundreds of depth charges, creating a vast field of underwater explosions designed to damage or destroy submarines through sheer volume of ordnance. This saturation approach had achieved some successes, but suffered from significant limitations. Depth charges had to be set to detonate at specific depths before being dropped, meaning attackers had to estimate correctly how deep the submarine had dived. Experienced submarine commanders learned to dive below the maximum depth setting of depth charges or maneuver unpredictably to avoid the falling charges. Moreover, the massive underwater explosions disrupted the attacking ship's sonar, making it impossible to assess whether the submarine had been hit or to maintain contact for follow-up attacks. An alternative theory emphasized precision over saturation. Advocates of this approach argued that careful sonar tracking, combined with accurate weapons delivery, would prove more effective than dropping hundreds of depth charges blindly. The Hedgehog weapon exemplified this precision approach. Rather than creating a vast field of explosions, Hedgehog fired a relatively small number of projectiles, 24 per salvo, in a carefully calculated pattern. The contact detonation feature meant positive confirmation when hits occurred and no sonar disruption when projectiles missed. Commander Haynes's operational strategy for hunting the NA line submarines incorporated elements from both theories. His 3-ship task groups would coordinate their attacks, with multiple vessels working together to track and engage submarines. George and Raby typically made initial attacks using conventional depth charges, forcing submarines to maneuver and potentially causing damage. These attacks also helped to precisely locate the submarine and establish its depth and movement patterns. England would then follow with Hedgehog attacks, using the tactical information developed by the previous attacks to achieve maximum accuracy. This coordinated approach proved devastatingly effective. The initial depth charge attacks disrupted Japanese submarine commanders' composure and forced them into predictable evasion patterns. England's sonar operators, observing these patterns, could predict the submarine's likely position and course. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton would then position England for an optimal Hedgehog attack, approaching on a course that would bring the ship's bow directly over the submarine's projected position at the moment of firing. Within England herself, tactical refinements emerged with each engagement. Executive Officer Williamson worked with the sonar team to develop techniques for maintaining contact even when submarines maneuvered violently. They learned to distinguish between genuine submarine contacts and false echoes caused by thermal layers or biological phenomena. They developed methods for estimating submarine depth based on sonar return characteristics and for predicting likely maneuver patterns based on previous engagements. The Hedgehog crew developed their own refinements. They learned optimal firing ranges for different target situations, how to adjust for the ship's speed and course, and how to account for ocean current effects on the projectiles' trajectories. Each attack provided data for improving the next, creating a continuous cycle of learning and improvement. A competing theory about submarine hunting emphasized the use of aircraft in coordination with surface ships. Proponents argued that aircraft could search vast areas quickly, detect surfaced or shallow diving submarines visually or by radar, and guide surface ships to contact. This theory would eventually prove important in later stages of the war. But during England's operations against the NA line, aircraft played a minimal role. The submarines were operating submerged in their patrol areas, making air detection difficult. The most important strategic theory proved to be the value of intelligence in anti-submarine warfare. Traditional submarine hunting involved searching vast areas of ocean, hoping to stumble upon enemy submarines. Decoded intelligence transformed this equation, providing specific information about where submarines would be located. This intelligence-driven approach reduced search areas from thousands of square miles to tens of square miles, dramatically increasing the probability of detection and successful attack. England's operations validated this theory conclusively. Every submarine she sank was found in the location predicted by decoded intelligence. Without this intelligence advantage, the task group might have searched for weeks without ever detecting a single submarine. With intelligence directing their searches, they achieved an unprecedented 6 kills in 12 days. The strategic lesson was clear. Intelligence, combined with effective weapons and skilled tactics, created an overwhelming advantage in submarine warfare. The theories and strategies tested during England's submarine hunt would influence anti-submarine warfare doctrine for decades. The Hedgehog weapon would become standard equipment on escort vessels. Intelligence-driven operations would become central to naval warfare, and the emphasis on precision, coordination, and continuous improvement would shape how navies approach the submarine threat in future conflicts. The deeper mystery surrounding USS England's unprecedented success centered on a fundamental question. Why was this particular ship so extraordinarily effective when other ships equipped with similar technology and conducting similar operations achieved far more modest results? The answer reveals the complex interplay of factors that create exceptional military performance. Technical factors provided part of the explanation. England's sonar equipment, while standard for Buckley-class destroyer escorts, was maintained to the highest standards. Chief Sonarman Maynard Smith ran a sonar room where equipment calibration was obsessive, drilled constantly, and any performance degradation was addressed immediately. This attention to technical excellence meant England's sonar provided clearer contacts and more accurate target information than equipment on ships where maintenance was less rigorous. The Hedgehog weapon installation on England functioned flawlessly throughout the 12-day submarine hunt. Each of the 24 projectiles fired correctly, the launcher mechanism operated smoothly under combat conditions, and the fire control calculations proved accurate. On other ships, Hedgehog installations sometimes experienced mechanical problems, misfires, or inconsistent performance. England's weapons crew, led by Chief Gunner's mate William Roach, maintained the system perfectly and practiced loading and firing procedures until they achieved machine-like efficiency. Leadership quality was perhaps the most significant factor. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton combined technical knowledge with tactical instinct and decisive command presence. He trusted his officers and crew to execute their duties without micromanagement, creating an atmosphere where initiative was encouraged and mistakes were treated as learning opportunities rather than occasions for punishment. This leadership style fostered confidence and competence throughout the crew. While Pendleton commanded during engagements, Williamson had spent months before the submarine hunt conducting endless drills, analyzing each training evolution, and refining procedures based on lessons learned. He created detailed attack plans that assigned specific responsibilities to each crew member and established backup procedures for every contingency. This preparation meant England's crew could execute complex attack sequences almost automatically, even under the stress of combat. The turning point in England's operations came with the 4th submarine engagement on May 24. RO 116, commanded by Lieutenant Yoshizumi Kamio, proved a more difficult target than previous submarines. Kamio was an experienced officer who had survived multiple depth charge attacks earlier in the war and understood evasion tactics thoroughly. When England gained sonar contact and began her attack run, Kamio executed a series of violent maneuvers designed to break contact and create confusion about his submarine's actual position. For the first time during the submarine hunt, England's initial Hedgehog attack missed completely. The submarine had turned sharply just before the projectiles reached their calculated impact point, causing them to fall harmlessly into empty water. Pendleton immediately ordered the ship to circle back for another attack, but RO 116 had gone deep and silent, making sonar contact difficult to maintain. For over an hour, England's sonar operators searched methodically, sweeping their detection beams through the depths, while Kamio remained motionless, hoping the American ship would give up and depart. This engagement tested England's crew more severely than any previous attack. The earlier kills had been achieved relatively quickly through near-perfect initial attacks. Now they faced a skilled opponent who refused to die easily, and a tactical situation where patience and persistence would matter more than quick action. The crew's response revealed the depth of their training and confidence. Rather than rushing into hasty attacks, they methodically narrowed the search area, using subtle sonar techniques to detect the silent submarine. When contact was finally re-established, Pendleton approached carefully, giving the submarine no indication that it had been detected until the moment of attack. The second Hedgehog salvo achieved multiple hits, destroying RO 116 and validating England's patient, tactical approach. This engagement marked a turning point because it demonstrated that England's success wasn't due merely to attacking easy targets. Even when facing a skilled opponent under difficult conditions, the ship and crew could adapt and prevail. The mystery of England's success ultimately resolves into understanding that exceptional performance emerges from the convergence of multiple factors: superior intelligence, providing target information, advanced technology in the form of sonar and Hedgehog weapons, meticulous maintenance, ensuring equipment reliability, extensive training, creating automatic execution of complex procedures, skilled leadership, fostering confidence and initiative, experienced operators continuously learning and refining techniques. No single factor was sufficient alone, but together they created a combat system that proved overwhelming against Japanese submarines. The deeper mystery was not why England succeeded, but why success on this scale was so rare. The answer reveals an uncomfortable truth about military effectiveness. Technical superiority alone is insufficient. The human factors, leadership, training, maintenance, and morale matter just as much, if not more, than the hardware itself. The implications of USS England's unprecedented submarine killing spree extended far beyond the immediate tactical victories. At the most basic level, the destruction of 6 submarines removed significant assets from Japan's already depleted submarine fleet. Each RO-class submarine represented months of construction effort, scarce raw materials, and trained crews that Japan could not easily replace. By mid-1944, Japan's industrial capacity was under severe strain from American submarine attacks on merchant shipping and strategic bombing raids on the home islands. The strategic implications became apparent when examining the broader context of Operation A-Go. The NA-line submarines were supposed to provide early warning of American fleet movements, giving Admiral Toyota's combined fleet time to position for the decisive battle that Japanese planners believed could could still turn the war's tide. The loss of the NA line eliminated this early warning system entirely. When American forces invaded Saipan on June 15, 1944, Japanese naval commanders were caught by surprise, their fleet out of position and unable to respond effectively. The subsequent Battle of the Philippine Sea, fought on June 19th and 20th, resulted in catastrophic Japanese losses. American carrier aircraft destroyed over 400 Japanese planes, while losing only 29 of their own, in what American pilots called the Marianas Turkey Shoot. 3 Japanese carriers were sunk, and Japanese naval aviation, as an effective fighting force, ceased to exist. The loss of the NA line submarines contributed to this disaster by depriving Japanese commanders of the intelligence they needed to position their forces effectively. The tactical implications influenced anti-submarine warfare doctrine throughout the remainder of World War II and into the Cold War era. England's success with the Hedgehog weapon validated the precision attack approach over saturation depth charge tactics. After May 1944, the Navy accelerated production of Hedgehog launchers and prioritized their installation on escort vessels. Training programs were revised to emphasize the techniques that England had demonstrated so effectively. The intelligence implications were perhaps most significant. England's operations proved conclusively that decoded communications intelligence could be exploited for direct tactical advantage in anti-submarine warfare. FRUPAC's ability to provide precise information about submarine positions enabled the entire operation. Without decoded intelligence, the task group would have been searching thousands of square miles of ocean with little probability of success. With intelligence, they achieved 6 kills in 12 days. However, the intelligence success created a security dilemma. Protect the source of the intelligence that had made it possible. If Japanese naval authorities realized their codes had been comprehensively broken, they might change their communication systems, eliminating this valuable intelligence source. Despite these attempts at secrecy, Japanese intelligence officers correctly deduced that American code breaking was responsible for the loss of the NA line submarines. Internal Japanese reports after the war revealed that some naval officers understood their codes had been compromised and urged immediate changes to communication procedures. Yet incredibly, higher-level commanders persisted in believing that their main naval codes remained secure. This denial continued to cost Japan dearly throughout the remaining year of the war, as American code breakers continued reading Japanese messages and directing American forces to intercept Japanese ships and submarines. The technological implications extended to submarine design and tactics. The Hedgehog's effectiveness demonstrated that submarines needed better defensive capabilities against forward-throwing weapons. Post-war submarine designs incorporated features intended to improve survivability against such attacks, including better damage control systems, deeper diving capabilities, and quieter operations to avoid detection. The cat-and-mouse game between submarine capabilities and anti-submarine technologies continues to this day. The human implications were sobering. England's 6 kills meant approximately 350 Japanese submariners died during those 12 days. Each submarine carried between 50 and 100 crew members who went down with their vessels. These were trained sailors who had spent years preparing for submarine operations, experienced officers who understood their craft thoroughly, and young men who died far from home in the service of their country. While the naval victories were celebrated, the human cost was substantial. Crews involved, particularly England's sailors, the implications were more positive but still complex. They had achieved an unprecedented success that brought recognition, awards, and pride. Yet they had also witnessed the brutal reality of naval warfare, where victory meant sending enemy sailors to their deaths. The psychological impact of repeatedly attacking and destroying submarines, knowing that crews were dying with each successful engagement, affected some crew members deeply. The broader implication was strategic. England's success demonstrated that by mid-1944, the United States had achieved overwhelming superiority in naval warfare through the combination of superior intelligence, advanced technology, better training, and greater industrial capacity. Japan could no longer compete effectively in any dimension of naval combat. The outcome of the Pacific War was no longer in doubt, only the timeline and final cost in lives. Behind the statistics and tactical analyses of USS England's submarine hunt lay profound human dimensions that deserve recognition. The young American sailors who crewed England were ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Most were in their late teens or early 20s, many experiencing their first time away from home, all facing the prospect of violent death in combat. The submarine hunt required them to perform technically demanding tasks while knowing that enemy torpedoes could sink their ship at any moment. The sonar operators spent hours in their dark, cramped compartment, headphones clamped over their ears, listening intently for the faint echoes that indicated a submerged submarine. The mental concentration required was exhausting. Every sound had to be evaluated, classified as either submarine contact, biological noise, or false echo from thermal layers or underwater terrain. Making the wrong classification could mean missing a submarine or wasting time pursuing a phantom contact. The Hedgehog crew worked exposed on the ship's foredeck, where they would be among the first casualties if a torpedo struck. They loaded the heavy projectiles, maintained the launcher mechanism, and waited for the order to fire, knowing that their success meant death for enemy sailors they would never see. Some crew members struggled with this reality, understanding intellectually that war required killing enemies, but finding it psychologically difficult to reconcile their actions with their peacetime values. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton carried the burden of command, responsible for every decision that could mean life or death for his crew and for the enemy submariners they hunted. Each attack required him to weigh risks carefully. Approach too cautiously, and the submarine might escape. Approach too aggressively, and the submarine might torpedo England. The stress of command in combat is immense, yet Pendleton maintained calm decisiveness throughout the 12-day hunt, inspiring confidence in his crew through his steady leadership. The Japanese submariners faced even grimmer circumstances. They knew American anti-submarine capabilities had improved dramatically since the war's beginning, but they had little understanding of just how completely their codes had been broken, or how effectively American forces could exploit decoded intelligence. When American destroyers appeared and began attacking, Japanese submarine commanders initially assumed they had been detected by chance. Only as the attacks continued did some begin to suspect that something more systematic was occurring. Each submarine commander faced impossible choices: follow orders and remain on station, accepting the risk of detection and attack, or abandon the assigned patrol area, potentially facing court-martial for dereliction of duty. Japanese military culture emphasized obedience and duty above personal survival, creating enormous pressure to remain on station even when circumstances suggested the mission had been compromised. This cultural factor contributed to the high casualty rate, as submarine commanders chose death over dishonor. The final moments aboard a submarine under Hedgehog attack were terrifying. The crew would hear the splashes as projectiles hit the water above them. Then seconds of silence as the projectiles sank toward the submarine. Some projectiles would miss, passing harmlessly by the submarine's hull, but those that hit would detonate on contact, rupturing the pressure hull, triggering catastrophic flooding. The submarine would begin its final plunge toward the ocean floor, with no possibility of escape for the crew trapped inside. The contrast between conditions aboard the attacking destroyer escort and the doomed submarine was stark. England's crew operated in relative safety, protected by their ship's speed and maneuverability. They could see the sky, breathe fresh air, and had reasonable hope of surviving if their ship was damaged. Submarine crews operated in claustrophobic conditions, breathing recycled air, unable to see threats approaching, with no hope of survival if their vessel was mortally damaged in deep water. Yet both sides showed courage under circumstances that tested men's limits. American sailors performed their duties, knowing that enemy torpedoes could kill them instantly. Japanese submariners continued fighting, even when their situation was hopeless, attempting to evade attacks until the final moment. These were not faceless enemies, but young men serving their countries, following orders, trying to stay alive while doing their duty. The humanity of the situation becomes clearer when considering individual stories. Among England's crew was a sailor whose brother had been killed at Pearl Harbor. His desire for revenge was personal and intense. Another crew member had Japanese-American friends in California and struggled with the knowledge that he was killing men who might have been those friends' relatives. These personal dimensions complicated simple narratives of heroism and victory. The aftermath brought its own human challenges. Some of England's crew members experienced nightmares about submarine attacks, imagining what the final moments must have been like for enemy crews. Others celebrated their victories without apparent psychological difficulty, viewing the enemy as abstractions rather than fellow human beings. The range of responses reflected individual differences in how people process combat trauma. Recognition that all participants were human, capable of courage and fear, deserving of respect even when they were enemies, adds depth to understanding these events. War forced young men on both sides to do terrible things to each other. Some rose to the challenge admirably. Others struggled with the moral complexity. All deserve to be remembered as individuals who faced circumstances they did not create. The revelation about USS England's achievement, understood fully only years after the events, was that her success represented the convergence of multiple revolutions in naval warfare. The story is often told as a simple tale of one ship sinking 6 submarines through superior weapons and skill. The deeper truth reveals a more complex transformation in how modern warfare was conducted, with England serving as the focal point where these changes came together with devastating effect. The intelligence revolution was fundamental. Before World War II, naval forces operated largely blind, searching vast ocean areas for enemy vessels, relying on chance encounters or visual scouting to locate opponents. The breaking of Japanese naval codes transformed this equation entirely. American forces could read enemy messages, understand their plans, and position forces to exploit this knowledge. England's submarine hunt demonstrated this revolution's full potential. Every submarine she sank was found because decoded intelligence revealed its location. The technological revolution in anti-submarine warfare was equally significant. The Hedgehog weapon represented a fundamental advance over conventional depth charges. Its forward-throwing capability meant the attacking ship could maintain sonar contact throughout the attack. Its contact detonation feature provided positive confirmation of hits and avoided the sonar disruption caused by depth charges. Combined with improved sonar equipment, the Hedgehog created a weapons system that was orders of magnitude more effective than previous anti-submarine technology. The training revolution is often overlooked, but was crucial. England's crew had spent months drilling on attack procedures, learning to operate as a coordinated team where each member understood his role perfectly, and could execute complex sequences almost automatically. This training created muscle memory that allowed the crew to perform effectively under the stress of combat. The contrast with Japanese submarine crews, who received abbreviated training due to wartime pressures, was stark and consequential. The doctrinal revolution involved understanding how to integrate intelligence, technology, and training into effective operational practice. Traditional naval doctrine had evolved slowly through centuries of fleet actions and commerce raiding. The submarine warfare of World War II required entirely new approaches. Commander Haynes's hunter-killer tactics, Pendleton's aggressive but calculated attack methods, and the systematic exploitation of decoded intelligence represented innovative doctrine created through experience and analysis. The Industrial Revolution underpinning American naval success became apparent when considering the broader context. USS England was one of hundreds of destroyer escorts built during World War II. The United States produced over 500 Buckley-class and similar destroyer escorts between 1942 and 1945. Japan, with its limited industrial capacity, could not match this production. American shipyards built vessels faster than they could be sunk, creating a quantitative advantage that complemented qualitative superiorities in technology and training. The revelation about Japanese submarine operations was equally significant. Their rigid doctrine, predictable patrol patterns, and excessive radio communications created vulnerabilities that American forces ruthlessly exploited. Japanese submarine commanders were skilled and brave, but they operated within a system that sacrificed flexibility for centralized control. When that system's communications were compromised through code breaking, the entire force became vulnerable to systematic destruction. The strategic revelation concerned the war's trajectory by mid-1944. Japan could no longer compete with American forces in any dimension of naval warfare. American industrial capacity was producing ships, aircraft, and weapons far faster than Japan could replace losses. American training programs were producing thousands of skilled sailors and aviators. American intelligence was reading Japanese messages and directing forces to exploit that knowledge. The outcome was no longer in doubt, only the timeline and final cost. The human revelation emerged from understanding that wars are ultimately contests between societies, not just between military forces. American society in 1944 could mobilize vast resources, absorb significant casualties, and sustain military operations across multiple theaters simultaneously. Japanese society, despite remarkable courage and determination, could not match this mobilization. The industrial, technological, and organizational advantages reflected deeper societal differences in education, economic development, and political systems. The final revelation was about the nature of military excellence. USS England's achievement was not due to superior courage or individual heroism, though her crew certainly displayed both qualities. Rather, success came from the integration of multiple factors: superior intelligence, better technology, more effective training, innovative doctrine, and skilled leadership. No single factor was sufficient alone, but together they created a combat system that proved overwhelming. This revelation has implications beyond World War II. Modern military effectiveness requires similar integration of intelligence, technology, training, and doctrine. The lessons learned from England's submarine hunt remain relevant for understanding how military forces achieve exceptional performance. Success requires not just better weapons or braver soldiers, but rather the systematic integration of all elements that contribute to combat power. The story of USS England thus transcends its specific historical moment to become a case study in military effectiveness. It demonstrates how intelligence advantage can be exploited, how new technology can transform warfare, how training creates competence, and how leadership focuses these elements towards successful outcomes. These lessons remain applicable today as military forces continue to integrate new technologies and adapt to changing circumstances. The legacy of USS England's 12 remarkable days in May 1944 extends through 8 decades to the present day. When Admiral Ernest J. King sent his famous message, "There will always be an England in the United States Navy," he made a promise that has been faithfully kept. Multiple ships have carried the name England since World War II, each honoring the memory of that first USS England and her extraordinary achievement, and ultimately honoring Ensign John C. England, whose heroic sacrifice at Pearl Harbor inspired the original ship's name. The second, USS England, a guided missile cruiser commissioned in 1963, served with distinction during the Cold War, providing air defense for carrier task groups and conducting operations in both the Atlantic and Pacific. England, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer commissioned in 2004, continues serving in the Pacific Fleet today, equipped with advanced anti-submarine warfare systems that trace their conceptual lineage back to the Hedgehog weapon that made her namesake famous. Lieutenant Commander Walton Barclay Pendleton continued his naval career after World War II. He never sought publicity for USS England's achievement, maintaining that the success belonged to the entire crew rather than to any individual. His quiet professionalism and deflection of personal credit earned him the respect of those who served under him. When interviewed in later years about the submarine hunt, he would emphasize the role of intelligence, technology, and crew training rather than his own tactical decisions. Executive Officer John A. Williamson eventually assumed command of USS England and led the ship through additional operations in the Pacific. His contribution to England's success through endless training and tactical refinement was recognized within the Navy, though it received less public attention than Pendleton's combat leadership. The partnership between Pendleton and Williamson exemplified how effective military organizations require both operational commanders and officers who build and maintain organizational competence. The crew of USS England received the Presidential Unit Citation, one of the highest honors that can be awarded to a military unit. The citation's language captured the extraordinary nature of their achievement. For extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines in the Pacific War area from May 19th to 31st, 1944. The USS England's brilliant performance in this vital mission contributed materially to the successful operations of our forces and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. Individual crew members returned to civilian life after the war, carrying memories of those 12 days when they had been part of something remarkable. Some struggled with the psychological impact of combat, the nightmares and stress that affected many combat veterans. Others adapted more easily, viewing their wartime service as a necessary duty performed and then put behind them. All carried the knowledge that they had served aboard a ship that made naval history. The Japanese submariners who died aboard the 6 submarines sunk by England and her sister ships are remembered in Japan as sailors who did their duty under impossible circumstances. Their families received official notifications that their loved ones had been killed in action, but the details of how they died remained unclear for years. Only after the war, when American records became available and survivors could share their stories, did the full story of the submarine hunt become known. The strategic impact of England's success reverberated through the final year of the Pacific War. The destruction of the NA line contributed to Japanese confusion about American intentions, enabling the successful invasion of the Marianas and the catastrophic Japanese defeat at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The loss of the Marianas brought American B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese home islands, making strategic bombing of Japanese industry and cities possible. This capability shortened the war and reduced American casualties by making an invasion of Japan less necessary. The technological legacy continues in modern anti-submarine warfare. The principles demonstrated by the Hedgehog weapon, forward-throwing attack, contact detonation, maintaining sonar contact throughout the attack, influenced the development of modern anti-submarine weapons systems. Contemporary surface ships employ sophisticated sonar arrays and advanced torpedoes that trace their conceptual ancestry to the systems used so effectively by USS England. The intelligence legacy is perhaps most significant. USS England's success demonstrated conclusively that signals intelligence could provide decisive tactical advantage in naval warfare. This lesson shaped Cold War naval operations and remains central to modern naval doctrine. The integration of intelligence with operations, making decoded information actionable through rapid dissemination to combat forces, became standard practice throughout military services. As time passes and the generation that fought World War II diminishes, the story of USS England becomes more important, not less. It represents a moment when ordinary Americans, thrust into extraordinary circumstances, rose to meet the challenge before them. The sailors who crewed England were not professional warriors or elite special operators. They were farm boys and factory workers, mechanics and students, called to service by their nation and trained to perform a difficult and dangerous mission. They did that mission superbly, achieving results that astonished even their commanders and set a record that has never been equaled. In 12 days, USS England sank 6 enemy submarines through a combination of intelligence, technology, training, and courage. That achievement, remarkable in its time, remains remarkable today as a demonstration of what dedicated people can accomplish when all elements of military power are effectively integrated and focused toward a clear objective. The promise made by Admiral King, that there will always be an England in the United States Navy, ensures that this story will be told to future generations of sailors. Each ship bearing the name England carries forward the legacy of those 12 days in May 1944, when one modest destroyer escort wrote her name indelibly in the annals of naval history and demonstrated that ordinary people, properly led and equipped, can achieve extraordinary things.